this side of the heatsink, where obviously there's no cold plate here. If you had a cold plate, sure, it would be better, but it's not necessary. And as we'll be showing, the thermal pads between the base plate and just the fins improve the temperature significantly. So this myth that I've seen sort of circulating that they're not doing anything and it's just raw measurements or something is not true and based on nothing. And so now that we've got experience with this, dozens of hours testing it, I can tell you definitively it doesn't matter. Another thing that I saw that I'd like to debunk quickly was a concern that because the thermal pad is placed where it is through their recommendation, there's no air getting down into the VRM anymore. Well, there's no air getting there anyway because there's a base plate on top of it. It's physically obstructed. And not only that, the chokes where there is, I guess you could call it an air channel, are flanked by capacitor banks on one side, which leads to the VRAM and GPU anyway, so that's irrelevant. And on the other side, flanked by a thermal pad, which allows really no air transfer to the MOSFETs. So air can't get in there. And air getting to the chokes doesn't matter anyway, because they can take so much heat. And in addition to that, a thermal pad on top of them has far and away greater thermal conductivity than air. Air, you might have something like 0.3 watts per meter Kelvin at 25C, where a thermal pad could be 7, could be 10, and I don't know what EVGA's pads are, but I assure you it's greater than air. I did ask them, though, what their thermal conductivity is. Haven't gotten a response yet. Oh, and one more thing. Some posts claimed that black screen issues on EVGA's first batch of cards were caused by VRMs overheating. That's wrong on many levels. A thermally compromised VRM will not throw a black screen that can be fixed by a restart. It'll go up in a puff of smoke, and you'll never be able to turn it on again. That's how they fail. The black screen issues have been resolved by EVGA and were, unfortunately to the company, another in a long list of issues and resolutions for this series of graphics cards, but they're not related, as far as we know, to this VRM thermal concerns. Anyway, enough clearing up those gripes. Let's use the data to show what's going on internally. If you have any questions whatsoever about how this testing was conducted, check the article linked below because it probably answers it in the methodology section. We're going to start with a stock card. That's with the original VBIOS and with no thermal pads applied through the thermal mod. Just a warning, this video will be very heavy on data. That's the point of it. I'm trying to sort of close the book on this series of questions about it, but that's the way it is. A lot of data, a lot of charts. Here's a table with the updated noise results. Originally, we tested the RPMs at 1500 to 1600, which was the pre-VBIOS update RPMs, and we tested that against the 2200 RPM that EVGA had informed us would be applied through the VBIOS update. After that testing, EVGA changed their VBIOS update so that the max fan speed was closer to 2000 rather than 2200, so that's the updated DBA results you're seeing on the screen now. This first temperature test is the stock card without an overclock, running combustor Furmark as a burn-in. Remember that Furmark is sort of a power virus. It loads the VRM more heavily than any game will ever do. Also note that Furmark doesn't blast the clock as much as the game would, but load is still heavy. The colors will be the same for every chart shown. Yellow is MOSFET 7, counting bottom up, and is a significant hotspot on the card. MOSFET 2 is a common scorch point in photos that we've seen online and is toward the bottom of the card, and that's orange. PCB is cyan and is measured on the hotspot on the rear side of the video card with the backplate on. GPU temperature is white and measured by software, and ambient temperature is also critical to these tests, so we'll leave that, as will later double ambient, and that's represented by a darker blue line at the bottom. We're seeing the PCB achieving temperatures just shy of 100C after a 1-hour burn-in. The MOSFETs are both at around 90 to 94C, with MOSFET 7 running a bit warmer. Ambient was in the low 20s for this test. Case ambient, as we show in this chart, is upwards of 40C in some enclosures, but that would account for gains in temperature, just not a one-to-one gain. So you can't add, for example, 20C to the results we're seeing if you have a 40C case, like we tested in our case review this week. We'll test this situation later, though. So far, these numbers are all numbers that the card is built to handle, and that's with Furmark. Here's Metro Last Light running a burn-in. We're seeing temperatures closer to 85C for the PCB backside and MOSFET 7, with MOSFET number 2 around 80C. That's around 10 to 20 Celsius cooler than with Furmark, depending on what you're looking at, and other games that show similar performance results. This chart shows the overclocking impact on a 1080 FTW without the VBIOS update and without thermal pads as benchmarked using Furmark. Temperatures get a little warmer here, now nearing 105 Celsius on the PCB and MOSFET number 7. That's hot enough that high case ambient would decrease your efficiency as you near 110C, but you should still be within safe operating range as we show in the forthcoming high ambient tests. Before the high ambient tests and before applying the thermal pads and the VBIOS updates, the next goal is to test SLI 1080 FTWs with a 1-slot spacing between them. So that's basically the cards are not immediately adjacent, but they're somewhere around that far apart. It's maybe a good 1.5 or 2 depending on what motherboard you're using. This chart has some manual tuning in it because I was basically trying to figure out where's the worst case scenario, so there were some changes going on live during the testing. The first half of this test was without any tester interference at all. We're at around 90 to 94 C for the FETs and the PCB temperatures, with GPU temperatures maintained around 80 C, the thermal limits to which fan RPM will slave. And that triggers a fan RPM of about 80% with SLI. That's in the native profile for the cards. This is where we decided to start playing around with the idea of torture testing, and so dropped the fan RPM back to its 60% speeds from auto, so auto was around 80, and a single card would run at around 60%, so it was worth testing. This pushes the temperatures up to about 105 to 107 C. It's starting to get a little more interesting. Here's the interesting part. You may have noticed that the VRM component temperatures for SLI are actually a little bit lower than the same scenario with a single card, and there's a good reason for that. The fan RPM is entirely controlled by the GPU. The fan doesn't know anything about the VRM temperatures. It doesn't know how hot the power stages are, how hot the inductors are, how hot the PCB is, or how hot the capacitors are. It also doesn't know, well, the fan doesn't know how hot the VRAM is either. So the GPU sort of controls everything with regard to fan speed, and that was where one interesting hypothesis came about, which is if you have a hotter GPU and therefore a lower RPM, if you follow that, hotter GPU, lower RPM, so we end up with this 80% speed in the situation of an SLI test, then suddenly your VRM starts to actually look better than if you had the reverse, where maybe there's a lower GPU temperature, but there's a lot of load on the power design of the card. This is where firmware comes in, and you end up with a hotter VRM, a lower fan speed because the GPU is cooler, and you end up with really a worst case scenario. Now it's time to move on to the VBIOS update. If you want to see how just the thermal pads perform without the VBIOS update, check the article below. Here's the first chart of the VBIOS updates. This one shows the FTW VRM with the new VBIOS applied, but without the thermal pad mod. We're hitting temperatures of around 85 C on the PCB and around 80 C on the second MOSFET compared to the stock card with the original VBIOS. This more aggressive fan speed profile improves performance by about 6 to 10 Celsius on the VRMs and about 15 Celsius on the PCB. That's just the fan profile. This is mostly the same as what we reported with the original PCB temperature testing using thermal imaging, and reconfirms our statement that the VBIOS update alone is enough to resolve the issues, though it's still good that EVGA is now shipping the cards with the thermal pads. And here's what it looks like with a video game. This is Metro Last Light at some of its most demanding settings on the GPU side, looped for a full hour. The outcome is temperatures around 75 C on the PCB and MOSFETs, and that's more than acceptable. These VRMs can handle way higher heat than that, and this is, mind you, with an ambient temperature of around 23 to 25 C as opposed to the earlier values near 20 C. This is the last chart for the VBIOS updates, at least before we move on to the thermal pad mod. This chart shows overclocking of plus 30% with the master switch engaged, and overvolting of plus 100%. The VRMs are hitting temperatures around 85 to 90 Celsius, obviously warmer, but it's still an improvement of more than 10 Celsius when looking at the old VBIOS and its OC performance. Again, acceptable temperatures. A bit warm, certainly a bit warmer than some of the competitors, but acceptable and within range. Here's a look at the thermal pads in addition to the VBIOS when running FurMark and stock clocks. So now we've added those pads that EVGA ships for free. The card is way below where it was stock, somewhere to the tune of 20 to 30 Celsius, depending on which test and component you look at, furthering the decision that, yes, these should be become cards. And temps are running around 85 to 87 Celsius for the backplate, and are around 75 to 80 Celsius for the FETs, while FurMark burn-in is running. So all this data is sort of, if not for you, for me, beginning to be a bit of an overload. It's difficult just to organize it. So the rest of these types of tests will be in the article again, but I've got one more set of tests that's pretty interesting, and it is for the high ambient torture test. The idea here was trying to kill the card actively. So this was no longer a normal use case. It entered into the realm of a challenge of how do I make this thing set itself on fire. Just to give you an idea, here's some footage of our CPU radiator dumping heat straight into the VRM fan. This is with Prime 95 running LFFTs crunching on an overclocked CPU, and with only one of the radiator fans turned on. Our CPU is at probably about 170 watt power draw during these tests. It's a lot. This is more than just a simulation of a high ambient case temperature. It's actually worse than that. It is directed airflow, not just sort of sitting air. The effective temperature that the card was breathing was often 40 Celsius of pure heat from another source of heat, which is the CPU. And I even lowered the fan RPM on the EVGA card to 50%, provided 30% more power, overvolted it 100% of allowance, and overclocked it by 125 megahertz. Another test I tried was connecting a case fan pointed strictly at the GPU, such that the GPU could run a colder temp and thus a higher clock and lower fan speed, but in a way that the VRM would still be incinerated by a lack of cool air because it's, again, directional. So that was the footage of some of this going on, and here's the chart with the outcome. None of it worked. This chart is the worst of the two. No thermal pads installed and an old BIOS, and after overclocking around the 3000 second mark, which is where you're seeing that tick up, I was able to hit about 126.8 Celsius max on the PCB backside, and about 108 to 109 Celsius on the VRMs. There was one tick to 110 that I saw, but didn't really reflect on the data. The ambient fluctuation you see is from when the radiator was moved closer to the card, so it would incinerate itself as much as possible. Moving on to the torture test with the new BIOS and the thermal pads installed. The best case scenario with the worst case testing environment. The worst I got was about 82 Celsius on the PCB, and that's a massive decrease. Mostly the thermal pads doing work too, so don't listen to those comments saying that the thermal pads do nothing, because they are utterly, completely false and based on nothing. We've done enough testing at this point that I can confidently tell you the thermal pads do actually contribute fairly noticeably to performance. Just looking at the fan speeds of these two charts, you'll see that we're even below at some points the overall speed from the previous chart when I was manually tuning the cards for worst case scenarios, and yet performance is better with the thermal pads applied. But that doesn't answer for the fact that every day we're seeing posts on Reddit and overclocking forums where you're seeing, allegedly anyway, scorched or singed, or in some cases dead cards from EVGA. So why is that happening? I reached out to EVGA and got a number that I can share with you all. The number is a 200 DPPM rate for their cards. That's defective parts per million. So out of 1 million cards shipped, video cards, complete cards, they're seeing 200 that are defects and returned or repaired or replaced through the RMA process, and that is all repairs, replacements for these series of cards. This means that for every 1 million, there's 200 defects. That's a percentage of about 0.02% of all cards shipped according to EVGA. I have no way of validating that. And we're told that this number is fairly consistent with previous generations. So it's just the defects, at least from what EVGA seems to think, are more noticeable this time because of the way the internet works. There's media coverage, there's people posting about issues on social media, and so now everyone posts their cards, even though maybe in the past it would have just been an email to the EVGA and a replacement sent out. So it is noisier, and the 200 DPM rate is really all I have to go off of for the answer. So why do we keep seeing these things pop up if thermals are not an issue? Which they are not, by the way. This testing pretty much proves it's not a thermal issue. So it's something else. Something else is going on here, at least for the 200 DPPM cards, the 0.02% of all cards shipped. Something going on, obviously. And it could just be things like manufacturing defects, workmanship, things like that. Here's a quick clip of a conversation I had with Buildzoid from Actually Hardcore Overclocking. He's got his own channel. We talk about the EVGA 10 series cards in a bit more electrical depth with him.
I'm gonna say it's the capacitors. They have a bad batch of, like, because the one consistent thing that's like starting to show up is you have scorch marks coming, like this latest one, it comes right off of, like you have the scorch mark coming right off the capacitor, right? There was a really early one where somebody had a blown out capacitor, just like capacitor completely fried in pieces. That was like the first report, and there I was like, oh no, that's just a manufacturing defect, that's not a thermal issue.
Right.
So this most recent one as well is just like capacitors, well, it's not blown to bits, but you can see that the solder on one side of it just like got shot right off. So that one's another, like, that's a capacitor failure. And basically all of the other ones are like varyingly more severe capacitor failures could cause those exact types of damage. And then along with the fact that Evga is claiming that, oh, there isn't a thermal issue, that would line up with why there isn't a thermal issue. You have a bad batch of capacitors. So I'm thinking it's like, because I read through the capacitor failure stuff, which I gave you a link to, and basically all of it's going to lead to pretty much short circuit explosion sort of scenarios, where the capacitor will be damaged partially. Over time it'll get worse. At some point it's going to short out and it's going to blow up. And since this isn't really temperature bound, that explains why it blows up at idle. Why it blows up without the capacitor actually being like properly powered or anything. You know, the one where it blows up from the PCIe slot right at startup. Like, especially considering that the thermals, even without the thermal pads, for most people won't be that bad. Right, considering like the temperatures you showed me from the testing, it's like fine. That's normal for a VRM. 100 degrees here, 100 degrees there is fine. It's just like, so I don't see. So it's basically, I'm almost certain that Evga just has a bad batch of capacitors on some of the cards. Hopefully not all of them. that would be a disaster, but I think they probably just have a bad batch of capacitors and they're just going up in flames, and now it's really up to Evga to just state probably that that's the case.
Right.
Like confirm it or disprove it, because they obviously don't have a thermal issue with the MOSFETs because we've tortured them.
So with thanks to Buildzoid for joining for that and for his expertise, it's clear to me at this point that there's no thermal issue with the EVGA cards, at least not one that kills them. The issue is something else, and it's probably something like individual components. It might be in the supply chain, maybe they got a batch of bad caps from their supplier, or it could be something else like workmanship or whatever other manufacturing defects. But these things are not dying because the VRMs are getting too hot. And that's even true for the stock card before VBIOS, before the thermal pads. Now, that said, obviously high temperature is not great. So it could be the case that you accelerate the death of the card caused by something else with high heat, but I still don't think that's the most likely cause. Regardless, if you have one of these now, you should still at least get the VBIOS update. It is installed through a double click and very easy, and your performance improves, at least thermally. And it's worth doing a thermal pad mod if you feel like you can, otherwise send it in or replace it with them, because the temperature improvement is just so great, it feels wrong to throw away a free improvement to that margin, especially for some of the worst case scenarios we've seen. Even though it's contacting here, you're still transferring a ton of heat from a hot component with a shell, a casing, to metal. So it's not going to air anymore. That's good. And it's free. Just apply that at least. If you don't have a card and you're thinking of buying one, at this point, there's a few things, right? There are the black screen issues that have been resolved, and I have seen those personally. And there were the thermal issues, which are really mostly a non-issue, but the sort of echo chamber of the internet is making the existing damage to cards caused potentially by other things, not thermal related, look a lot worse than maybe you would feel comfortable with making a purchase. So that's acceptable. That's totally fine. If you don't want to buy it because you're like, this looks like a lot of problems, I don't feel comfortable, then don't buy it. It's as simple as that. If you kind of had your heart set on one of these, and these questions that arose about thermals made you step back and go, well, let me see how this resolves, you can probably buy it and be fine. Everything sold after November 1st will have the thermal pad replacement and the VBIOS update. Maybe there's a few items out there on shelves in small shops, but other than that, they're all updated at this point. Some were pulled back by EVJ and updated even after being sent to retailers. So I think that mostly recaps it. Assuming what EVJ told me is correct, assuming a 0.02% failure rate, this seems like a low enough occurring issue that you could buy one of these and still be okay. But that is not an excuse for EVGA's lack of thermal pads and the slack VBIOS profile, because the temperatures were way higher than they need to be. Even though it was still safe, it just wasn't competitive. And that has been fixed. So I think now we can kind of close the book on all this. That covers every angle possible. If you want more, I guess hit the link I'm exhausted on this topic, so we won't be covering it again. Thank you for watching. As always, Patreon link in the postal video. Do click that because it helps us fund these types of things where it basically turns into a huge research project for time. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you all next time. Had enough suggestions lately to revisit older architecture cards, ideally 2 generations back. This is the GTX 770, and today we are sort of reviewing it. We're rebenching it to look at how it compares against modern cards, because it's about the upgrade cycle for owners of the GTX 770. It's been out 3 years now. It came out in May of 2013, so it's about time for folks to be looking around for upgrades, though it does still do pretty okay in most games. Before getting to the benchmark,
attacking our core.
Recruit these mercenaries.
Hello, everyone. It is your host, Seth the Programmer, back at it again with another debatable topic. With me today, I have my good friend Chuck the Cybercuck. Please say hello.
Hey, boys.
So today we're doing a video on the infamous laser feat where Goku gets taken out by Sorbet's laser in his base form in Dragon Ball Super. We're bringing this up because a lot of comic fans or whatever goddamn fandom will use whatever they can to try to attack Goku with Dragon Ball Z. And this is the ringer right here. Is
Time to end it all.
Goku losing to a fucking laser. So in this video, we're gonna explain everything to do with it. Other than that, let's just get right into it and let's debunk these guys.
So people seem to think that because Goku got owned by a laser, that he suddenly has laser gun durability and needs fodder, right? However, as a reminder, Goku has been fighting against like the Red Ribbon Army when he was a little kid, right? And these guys had like fucking tanks, they had helicopters that fired rockets and missiles, everything, right? And if I remember correctly, Goku even got hit by a flamethrower that could melt through steel, right? So insane shit.
And a jet's afterburners point blank from General Blue.
And Goku was just a little kid back then, right? So you're gonna tell me that Goku has been training for like decades, right? Getting all these Super Saiyan power-ups, you know, training in many times Earth's gravity and fighting against like the strongest beings in the universe. He's gonna get owned by a fucking laser gun. Even when he was a little kid, like he didn't even receive any of his like greatest training, like with Kami or King Kai or Korin, he could still like survive machine gun bullets from like Bulma, right? He had a power level of 10.
Even as a kid, he took King Piccolo's Demon Explosive Wave, which obliterated an entire city, right? Like, he tanked it as just a little kid.
And Piccolo was stronger than Roshi who could destroy the moon, so... Anyways, so there's a very, very simple explanation to all this, right? So if you guys remember when we talked to Goku and Vegeta about their weaknesses, you know, he noted that Vegeta's weakness was that he was too arrogant, he was too cocky, and...
It's kind of tense.
Yeah. And basically, then Goku was, you know, laughing his ass off. He's like, ha ha ha, right? And then we just suddenly fucking decks him, not dicks him, decks him on the side
down.
He decks him on the side of his hip, you know, on his chest, and he's like, oh shit, that hurt. And then we just like, okay, so you, like, your weakness that you are off guard, that you like, you're basically too much at ease, right? You don't know when to, like, take your opponent seriously, or you're like, you're essentially like suppressing yourself all the time, right? Because you take it too easy. Yep. And then, you know, Vegeta said, ha, so you have a weakness as well, right? So that's explained right there. Now,
an example of him taking it too easy, by the way, is in a famous filler scene where Krillin throws a fucking rock at his head when he's sleeping, and Goku thinks it's the most painful thing ever. Like, he starts screaming in agony that this rock just hit him in the face. Yet, as a Super Saiyan versus Frieza, even in the manga, when Frieza's like fucking shit up and going crazy, like there's like a storm of rocks that hits Goku in the face and they just bounce off. Even larger rocks, they just bounce right off his face. Yet when he was off guard and suppressed and just taking it too easy, that little rock Krillin threw like fucked his world up. Like it rocked him. Oh, okay, no pun intended for that, but. I didn't even intend that.
so fucking corny, dude.
I didn't intend that. I'm sorry, but it rocked it, right? I mean rock as in like the you know, boxing sense. Right? I didn't mean that. Okay.
Anyways, people seem to forget that Goku, when he was on guard, like when he fought against Frieza like fucking shot a death beam out of his face, and Goku just smirked it off, right? And he says, so it seems they can destroy planets, but you can't destroy a single man. Like, the attack didn't do shit to him, right? And when he was on guard, he even, like, deflected away, like, Frieza's attack with his bare hands, right? He just threw it, and, like, it destroyed another planet outside of Namek, right? Like, he just threw into deep space, blew it the fuck up, right? And then other examples, like Trunks and Frieza, you know, he held a supernova with just his hands, you know? So, like, when they're on guard, simple shit like that is not gonna hurt them, right?
Even Frieza was like, he just died to a fodder-ass ray gun. Like, you know, the same guy that could tank death beams to the face got killed by some, like, Frieza fodder in the background. Like, that was the big deal he made. And this isn't even just Goku. This is any Dragon Ball character when they're actually caught off guard and hit by an attack that's stronger than them when they're suppressed.
I even have another example, like when Vegeta was trying to get a Zenkai to fight Frieza, he suppressed himself so much that Krillin's attack could like blast through him and basically almost kill him, right?
Yeah.
So he lowered his power on purpose so he can get hurt by an attack that's like that weak, right?
Unless you think Krillin is stronger than Vegeta, like let's go.
Right. So Goku did the same thing essentially. He's like, okay, so Frieza is basically, he looks like he's incapable to fight, so I don't need to like take him seriously anymore. Like I could just lower my power, lower my guard, whatever. I'll take it easy. He's defeated, right? The Frieza's plan came into fruition, and he fucking dicked him down, and he was about to kill him, and blah blah blah.
Now, when like a comic fanboy or an anime fanboy, not from Dragon Ball, says, "Oh, this character can beat Goku because he can't even take lasers," that's inaccurate. If Goku is serious against you, you're not gonna fucking penetrate his body with a laser. If you do catch him off guard, I mean you could, but if you're having like a serious confrontation, there is no laser durability bullshit. Like that's just redundant.
So now, guys, this is what we know as a low end or a plotting stupidity event. Now, this is not only in Dragon Ball; it's across literally any fucking series in fiction, right? So to bring you guys some really good points, so Saitama, the unbeatable, limitless gag character, got fucking hurt by a cat scratching him, right? They would have told you the cat is stronger than Boros, even though Saitama is in a combat situation, right?
Or
That's
the
explanation.
mosquito. Or the mosquito
Yeah.
fucking.
Yeah, you couldn't catch a fucking mosquito, you know, and it's like, it's a gag shit. Okay, so that's not enough for you. Okay, so Superman, right? The limitless fucking god, right? Okay. So, pre-Crisis Superman, he literally got shot and knocked out by a fucking, like a shotgun. And he even also got knocked out by, like, some iron rod or something. Like, it was some magic shit. Like, it literally just stabbed him in his head and he got knocked out. It was fucking hilarious. So Superman, the character that can tank a big bang or send the solar system away, and his low ends can get fucking owned by a gun, right? Even post-Crisis Superman has shown this before. He failed to catch bullets one time. I mean, come on, dude. Yeah, he can lift infinity, but he can't fucking catch bullets. Okay. Hell, you know, like I'll even bring up my favorite characters. Okay, so Thanos, you know, who can like duel against people that can throw galaxies and shit. He got fucking arrested by cops.
Dude, I think like some subway workers like called the cops on him and they just took him away.
Dude, like literally, Thanos was fighting against Spider-Man and all these other heroes, and he had his cosmic cube or whatever. And suddenly the cops show up and take him away. Come on, man. Okay, another example. Darkseid, who like beats the shit out of the Justice League and Superman all the time. Fucking regular humans like beat the shit out of him and mugged him. They took his money and left him there. Another example, Silver Surfer, who can basically survive solar systems exploding on him and, you know, can destroy stars and shit like that. He got fucking tied up by regular humans because they thought like they could like catch him and like showcase him as like an alien, like, you know, because they found an alien, right, for the first time or whatever. he literally just got tied up against his will. They took him away. Like, another example, like fucking Batman kicked Spectre in the face.
Fuck.
Spectre, multiversal being at his best, gets fucking kicked by Batman.
And this is no crazily this is just normal Batman, dude. The same dude that can like squat like 2,000 pounds fucking just kicked Spectre away. What the fuck?
So as you guys can see, basically in virtually any character in fiction has had a low end at least one time, right? And like there's a lot of explanation to this, you know, for example, you know, it's a gag feat, you know, or I mean a gag scene, I mean, and then or it's a parody or it's a plotting stupidity moment in which like the villain is basically somehow defeated by some bullshit, right? So I mean that's the case for many of these events. Like Goku has explanation, he was off guard. Superman, he's inconsistent. Like Silver Surfer was off guard or whatever as a gag scene. Like it's a very simple concept. So I don't see why people still
They're
using this
just
speed.
low-end feats. It's not something to be taken seriously for its maximum durability.
as a fucking regular human, or it's fucking stronger than
Yo,
this.
Jacko's gonna pull out his ray gun and his body Super Saiyan Blue Goku. Fuck out of here.
Fucking arrest Thanos. Yeah, I'm gonna fucking arrest.
Yo, me and Chuck are gonna go get Thanos right now. Get the handcuffs.
Yeah, dude.
Like,
Gotta put him in timeout.
so, anyways, that was our explanation of the laser feat. It's not something to be taken seriously. If someone does unironically use the laser feat, like, as a logical excuse for why someone beats Goku, just ignore them. Like, they just literally disregard them from existence. Like, their opinion is irrelevant. But, anyways, guys, I hope you learned something. Subscribe to Chuck if you haven't already. And other than that, till next time.
Peace out, hoes.
In the second half of Dragon Ball Super Episode 63, Vegeta gave Goku Black an ass whooping like one we haven't seen in quite some time. He got him some of Goku Black, the cocky, evil Zamasu who took over Goku's body. But the question that I've seen posed is how the hell did Vegeta go from losing to Goku Black, somewhat embarrassing might I add, to actually being able to dominate over him during this most recent encounter. On this video, I'm going to analyze the data that we have and come to a conclusion when it comes to answering the question of how Vegeta got so strong so fast in Dragon Ball Super.
Mr. Satan wants you to subscribe to Geekin' 101 on all these social media platforms. You jump? Oh yeah!
So how did Vegeta get so strong so fast, and how strong is Vegeta? Well, before examining that question, we have to go back and remember Vegeta's character. Even though Goku was trained by various martial artists throughout the series, and like Vegeta is a prodigy despite being born with a very low power level, one cannot forget that Vegeta is indeed a Saiyan super elite. That's one detail that people forget. And even though Goku was able to tap into powers and discover new training methods